Chapter I of the Sorcery Club by Elliott O'Donnell. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. Recording by Don W. Jenkins. For more information and to find out how you can volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Chapter I. How They First Heard of Atlantis. Rain is responsible for a great deal more than the mere growth of vegetables. It is a controller, if a somewhat capricious controller, of man's destiny. It was mainly, if not entirely, owing to rain that the French lost the Battle of Agincourt, whilst, if I mistake not, Confucius alone knows how many victories have been snatched from the Chinese by the same factor. It was most certainly rain that drove Leon Hamar to take refuge in a second hand bookshop, for so deep rooted was his aversion to any literature saving a financial gazette or the stock and shares column of a daily, that nothing would have induced him to get within touching distance of a book save the risk of a severe wetting. Now to his unutterable disgust he found himself surrounded by the things he loathed. Books, ancient, very ancient, judging by their bindings, and modern, histories, biographies, novels, and magazines, anything from $10 to 5 cents, and all arrayed with most laudable tact according to their bulk and condition. But Hamar was neither to be tempted nor mollified. He frowned at one and all alike, and the colossal edition of Miss Somebody or Other's poems, that by reason of its magnificent cover of crimson and gold occupied a most prominent position, met with the same vindictive reception as the tattered and torn volumes of Whittier stowed away in an obscure corner. Backing still further into the entrance of the store for a better protection from the rain, which, now falling heavier and heavier, was blown in by the wind, Hamar collided with a stand of books, with the result that one of them fell with a loud bang on the pavement. A man, evidently the owner of the store and unmistakably a Jew, instantly appeared. Picking up the book and wiping it with a dirty handkerchief, he thrust it at Hamar. "See," he said, "you have damaged this property of mine. You must either buy it or give me adequate compensation." "What!" Hamar cried. "Compensation for such rubbish as that? Why, all your books together are not worth $5. Even I've seen twice as many sold at a sale for half that amount. You can't Jew me." The two men eyed each other quizzically.
"Perhaps," the owner of the store observed slowly, "perhaps some of your ancestors were once Yiddish, in which case there ought to be a bond of sympathy between us. You may have that book for a nickel." "What? No! Your cheeks are hollow, your fingers thin. A nickel is too much for you. I will take your chain in exchange."
"And leave me the watch?" Hamar retorted with a grim smile. "You are a philanthropist, not a storekeeper."
"I should leave you nothing," the Jew laughed. "There's no watch there. See?" and he pointed to the concave surface of the watch pocket. "I noticed its absence at once. It's been keeping you alive for some days past. I'll give you $4 on the chain, and you may have the book."
"The book's no good to me," Hamar grunted. "The money is. Here, hand me over the $4 and you can have the chain. It's 18-karat gold and worth at least $10.
"Then why not take it to someone who will give you $10?" sneered the Jew. "Because you know better. You're no greenhorn. That chain is 15-karat at the most, and there's not a man in this city who would give you more than $4 for it."
"Very well, then," Hamar said sulkily. "I agree. No, the money first." The Jew dived deep down into his trouser pocket, and, after foraging about for some seconds, produced a handful of greasy coins, out of which he carefully selected the sum named. Hamar, who had been watching him greedily, grabbed the coins, bit them with his teeth, and rang them on the counter. With an air of relief he then slipped his watch chain into the outstretched palm before him, remarked upon the fact that the rain had suddenly ceased, and prepared to take his departure.
"Here's the book," the Jew ejaculated, whilst his face became suffused with a smirk. "Don't go without it. Now there's no knowing but what we may not have further dealings with one another. I'm a money lender. I've a place downstairs. I take all sorts of things. On the strict QT, mind. Sabez."
In another moment Hamar found himself standing on the wet pavement, nursing the $4 in his waistcoat pocket with one hand, and mechanically clutching the despised volume with the other. Had he ever acted upon impulse, he would most certainly have hurled the book into the gutter, but on second thoughts he came to the conclusion that it would be better to dispose of it less obtrusively. It was now evening, and having tasted nothing since midday, he realized, for at least the 100th time that week, that he was hungry. The touch of the dollars, however, only made him smile. He could eat his full for 25 cents, and yet live well for another 4 days. And, besides, he still had a tie pin and a fur coat. He might get $1 on the one and 2, if not 2.5 on the other, which would carry him through till the end of the week, when something else might turn up. Something which would not involve too hard work and would just keep him clear of jail. He turned sharply down Montgomery Street, crossed Kearny Street, and slipped noiselessly through the side doorway of a restaurant in a suspicious looking alley, not 100 yards distant from the gorgeously illuminated Palace Hotel. Here, within 5 minutes, he was served with as good a meal as one could get in San Francisco for the money, and if the table linen was not as clean as it might have been, the food was not a whit the less excellent for that. At least so Hamar thought. And it was not until there was nothing left to eat that he left off eating. When he thought no one was looking in his direction, he popped the despised book under his chair and rose to go. Before he had gone 10 yards, however, one of the waiters came running after him. "Hi, sir! Stop, sir!" the fellow cried. "You've left something behind." And, in spite of Hamar's denials, the officious menial persisted the book was his. In the end Hamar was obliged to submit. He took the book and rewarded the waiter with curses. Hamar next tried to dispose of it down the area of a Chinese laundry, but a policeman saw him, and he only escaped being taken up on suspicion by parting with $1. This was the climax. He did not dare make any further attempt to dispose of the book, but, with bitter hatred in his heart, tucked it savagely under his arm and made direct for his room in 115th Street. To his annoyance, for under the circumstances he preferred to be alone, he found 2 men sitting in front of his empty hearth. They were Matt Kelson and Ed Curtis, both of whom had been his colleagues at Meidler & Company, in Sacramento Street, and, like himself, had been thrown out of work when the firm had "smashed." Since that affair Hamar had studiously avoided them. It was true he had once been as friendly with them as he deemed it politic to be friendly with anyone, but now they were out of employment and in danger of starvation. That made all the difference. He did not believe in poverty encouraging poverty any more than he believed in charity among beggars. He had nothing to share with them, not even a thought, and resolving to get rid of his quondam friends as soon as possible, he confined his welcome to a frown.
"Hullo! What's the matter?" Kelson exclaimed. "When a man frowns like that, it usually means he is crossed in love."
"Or has an empty stomach, which amounts to the same thing," Curtis interposed. "Come, let the sun loose, Leon. We've good news for you, haven't we, Matt?" Kelson nodded.
"What is it, then?" Hamar grunted. "Have you both got cancer?"
"No, we've come to borrow from you."
"Then you've come to the wrong shop. I'm about done, and unless something turns up mighty quick, I shall clear out."
"For good?" "I don't count on being a ghost, nor yet an angel," Hamar said. "When we've done here, I reckon we've done altogether." "I shouldn't have thought suicide was in your line," Curtis remarked. "More mats. I should have credited you with something more original." "Original?" Hamar snarled.
I defy any man to be original when he hasn't a cent and his stomach contains nothing but air. Give me money, give me food, then perhaps I'll be original."
"You don't mean to say you're cleared out of grub?" Kelson and Curtis cried in chorus. "We've come to you as our last hope. We've neither of us tasted anything since yesterday."
"Then you'll taste nothing again to day, at least as far as I'm concerned," Hamar jeered. "I tell you I'm broke, haven't as much as a crumb in the room, and I've pawned everything, save the clothes you see me in."
"And yet you can buy books unless you stole it," Curtis said, eyeing with suspicion the volume Hamar had thrown on the table.
"Buy it? Not much!" Hamar cried quickly. "It's one I've had all my life. Belonged to my grandfather. I took it with me to night to see what I could raise on it." "And no one would have it? I should guess not," Kelson said, drawing it towards him. "Why, it's got a new label inside. S. Leipman. I know him. He's slick even for a Jew. This looks as if it belonged to your grandfather, Leon. If I'm not real mistaken, you bought the book to night. There's something in it you thought you could make capital off of. Trust you for that. Now I wonder what it was." "You're welcome to see," Hamar sneered. "Perhaps you'd like some water."
"Water? Why water?"
"Well, instead of tea or whisky to help to digest the book. Besides, it's the only thing I have to offer you."
"Look here, Leon," Curtis interrupted. "What's the good of behaving like this? We're all in the same boat starving, desperate. So let us lay our heads together and see if we can't think of some way out of it."
"A burglary company limited, for instance," Hamar sneered. "No, I'm not having any. I've neither tools nor experience. The San Francisco police handle one roughly, so I'm told, and hard labor isn't to my liking."
"There are other things besides burglary," Curtis said in tones of annoyance. "We might work a fake."
"If I work anything of that sort," Hamar said hastily, "I work alone. Think of something else."
"I tell you Matt and I are pretty well desperate," Curtis cried, "and if we don't think of something soon, we shan't be able to think at all. We've tried our level best to get work. We've answered every likely and unlikely advertisement in the papers, and all to no purpose. So if Providence won't help us, we must help ourselves. Robbery, burglary, fakes, anything short of murder, it's all the same to us now. We're tired of starving, dead sick of it. We would do anything sell our very souls for a meal. My God, I never imagined how terrible it is to feel so hungry. You appear to be interested, Matt. What is it?"
"Why, look here, you fellows," Kelson said slowly. "This book is all about a place called Atlantis, that is said to have existed in the Atlantic Ocean between America and Ireland, and to have been deluged by an earthquake owing to the wickedness of its inhabitants. They practised sorcery."
"Practised foolery," Hamar said. "It's tosh, all tosh. Wickedness is only a matter of climate, and there's no such thing as sorcery."
"So I thought," Kelson replied, "but I'm not so sure now. The author of this book writes darned sensibly, and is apparently at no loss for corroborative testimony. He is a professor, too. See? Thomas Henry Maitland, at one time Professor of English at the University of Basel in Switzerland. There's an asterisk against his name, and a footnote in very old fashioned handwriting. The S's are all F's, and half the letters capitals. Listen: Thomas Maitland, despite the remonstrances of his friends, visited Spain. By order of the Holy Inquisition he was arrested May 5, 1693, on a charge of practising sorcery, and burned alive at the Auto da Fe in the Grand Market Square, Madrid, having in the interim been subjected to such tortures as only the subtle brains of the hellish inquisitors could devise. On receipt of a message from him, delivered in his supernatural body, we attended his execution, and can readily testify that he suffered no pain, although the torments endured by those around him were pitiable to behold. Signed, George Richard Poole, physician, and Robert James Fox, merchant, citizens of Boston, Massachusetts, August 1, 1693.
"Rot!" Hamar said savagely. "Don't waste time reading such bunkum." "It may be bunkum, but if it takes away his mind from his stomach, let him go on," Curtis interposed. "It's very obvious you haven't arrived at our pitch of starvation yet, Leon, or you would welcome anything that would make you forget it even for a moment. Let's hear some more, Matt. Go on, tell us something. How to make coyotes out of paraffin paint, or convert a Sunday pair of pants into a glistening harem skirt. Anything that won't remind us of food." Thus encouraged, Kelson slowly turned over the pages of the book.
"I see it was printed and published for I presume that means by A. Bettesworth and J. Batley in Paternoster Row, London, England, in 1690. Basel, London, Boston, Madrid. The author seems to have had wandering on the brain. By the by, Leon, with your features you could easily work off a fake as the Wandering Jew. There's money in it. People will swallow anything in that line now." "I don't see how it would profit you, anyhow," Hamar snarled. "Leave my features alone and go on with your reading."
Kelson chuckled. Here was one way at least in which he could occasionally get even with Hamar. Hamar's features were Yiddish, and the Yids were none too popular in California.
"Oh, all right," he said. "If the subject is so painful, I'll try and avoid it in the future. But it's odd how some things for instance, murder and noses will out. Let me see. What have we here? Discovery of ancient books, manuscripts, etc., relating to Atlantis. Apparently Thomas Maitland, when shipwrecked on an island called Inisturk, off Mayo in Ireland, found a wooden chest of rare workmanship. He had seen, he says, similar ones in Egypt and Yucatan, containing some very ancient books, curiously bound, and some vellum manuscripts which, after an infinite amount of labour, he managed to translate. The books, he says, were standard histories, biographies, and scientific works on occultism, all published in Banchichesi, the capital of Atlantis, and the manuscripts, he affirms, had been transcribed by one Colmenes, who believed himself to be the only survivor of a tremendous submarine earthquake that had destroyed the whole of Atlantis. The manuscripts included a diary of the events leading up to the catastrophe, even to the meals. How about this? Sunrise on the day of Thottirnanoge, in the month of Finra, breakfasted on cornsop fish, Simona corresponding to salmon, fruit, and much sweet milk.
"For God's sake, don't!" Curtis groaned. "Skip over that part. The very mention of grub makes the gnawing pain in my stomach 10 times worse."
"You're different to me, then," Hamar grinned. "I love to think of it. My word, what wouldn't I give to be in Sadler's now? Roast beef done to a turn, eh? As only Sadler knows how. Potatoes nice and brown and crisp. Horseradish, greens, boiled celery, pudding under the meat. Beer. What? Going?" Curtis had risen from the table with his fingers crammed in his ears.
"There's a fat splice of the devil in you to night, Leon," he panted. "I've had enough of it. I'm off. Come on, Matt. If you want us, you know where to find us. Only if we don't get something to eat, soon, you'll find us dead." End of Chapter 1. Read by Don W. Jenkins, Rancho San Diego, California. Chapter 2 of the Sorcery Club by Elliott O'Donnell. This recording is in the public domain. Recording by Don W. Jenkins. Chapter 2 The Black Art of Atlantis. For some time after Kelson and Curtis had left him, Hamar lolled back in his seat, lost in thought. Thought, as he told himself repeatedly, should be the poor man's chief recreation. It costs nothing. And if one wants a little variety, and the walls of one's rooms are tolerably thick, one can think aloud. Hamar often did, and derived much enjoyment from it.
I'm convinced of one thing," he suddenly broke out. "I'd rather be hungry than cold. One can in a measure cheat one's stomach by chewing leather or sucking pebbles, but I'll be hanged if one can kid one's liver. It's cold that does me. A touch of cold in the liver. I could jog along comfortably on a few dollars for food, but it's a fire I want. The temperature of this room is infernally low after sunset, and half a dozen coats and 3 pairs of pants don't make up for half a grateful of fuel. Hunger only makes me think of suicide, but cold and a chilled liver makes me think of crime. Yes, it's cold that could make me a criminal. I would steal, burgle, housebreak, cut the sweetest lady's throat in Christendom for a fire. There, that little outbreak has relieved me. Now let me have a look at the book." He dragged the volume towards him, and despite the feeling of antagonism with which it had inspired him, and despite the cynical attitude he had, up to the present, adopted towards the supernatural, he speedily became engrossed. On a few leaves, somewhat clumsily inserted between the cover and first page of the book, Hamar read an account, presumably in the author's own penmanship, of how he, Thomas Maitland, after being shipwrecked, had remained on Inisturk Island for a fortnight before being rescued, and had spent the greater portion of that time in examining the books, etc., in the chest he had found, his only food, shellfish and a keg of mildewy ship's biscuits. He was taken, so the account ran, by his rescuers on the barque Hannah to London, where he lived for 5 years. His lodgings were in Cheapside, and it was there that he compiled his work on Atlantis, having obtained his subject matter from the Atlantean books he had managed to bring with him, and which, after an enormous amount of perseverance and labour, he had translated into English. Though these books were subsequently destroyed in a big fire that demolished the entire street, luckily for him, he had sent his manuscript to the publishers, Messrs. Bettesworth and Batley, a week or so before the conflagration broke out, so that he was, at any rate, spared the loss of his own arduous and invaluable work. The publishers did not accept the manuscript at once. At that time there were very severe laws in operation against anything savouring of witchcraft and magic, and as the manuscript dealt at length with these subjects, and in a manner that left no doubt whatever that he, Thomas Maitland, had practised sorcery extensively, Messrs. Bettesworth and Batley were forced to consider whether it would be injurious to them to publish it. Mrs. Bettesworth was eventually consulted, as indeed she always was on extraordinary occasions, and her interest in the manuscript being roused, she decided in its favour. Within a week of its publication, however, it was suppressed by law. All the copies saving 3 presentation ones to the author, which he successfully concealed, were destroyed. Messrs. Bettesworth and Batley were put in the stocks on Ludgate Hill and fined heavily, and he, Thomas Maitland, was ordered to be arrested, flogged and imprisoned. "But," wrote Maitland, "I was not to be caught napping. My previous adventures and hairbreadth escapes had rendered me unusually wary, and perceiving a number of people, among whom were 2 or 3 sheriff's officers, approaching my house, I at once interpreted their mission, and climbing through a trap door leading on to the roof of the building, nimbly made my way to the end of the row, and slipping down a water pipe, easily eluded my enemies. London, however, being now too hot to hold me, I booked passage on board the Peterkin, a Thames trading vessel of some 80 tons, and sailed for Boston. My flight had been so hasty that I brought very little with me, nothing, in fact, except the clothes I stood in, a stout winter suit of homespun brown cloth, a cloak, and a pair of good, strong leather leggings, a purse of 50 sovereigns all I had, a knife, pistol, and 2 copies of my precious book. The third copy, alas, I had left behind in my hurry." After giving a few unimportant details as to his life on board ship, Maitland went on to say: "Owing to a succession of storms, the Peterkin was driven out of her course, and after narrowly escaping being dashed to pieces on the Florida reefs,
latitude 24½ degrees north, longitude 82 degrees west, we ran ashore with the loss of only 2 lives, the second mate and the cabin boy, on the Isthmus of Yucatan, close to the estuary of a river. Footnote 1: The river referred to by Maitland is the River Lagartos, which was then, in 1691, unnamed. End of footnote. Here we were forced to spend nearly a year, during which time I made several journeys of exploration into the interior of the continent. In the course of one of my rambles amid a dense mass of tropical foliage, I suddenly found myself face to face with a gigantic stone sphinx, which I at once recognized and identified. It was Tat Nuada, an Atlantean deity elaborately described in one of the burned books. Much excited, I set to work, and, after clearing the base of the idol of fungi and other vegetable growth adhering to it, discovered a superscription in Atlantean dialect to the effect that the image had been set up there by one Hulir, to commemorate the destruction of Atlantis, of which catastrophe Hulir believed himself and his family, that is, his wife Ozilmave and daughters Taramu and Niketoth, and the crew of his yacht, the Chak Moray, 10 in number, the sole survivors. Here, then, to my unutterable joy, was strong corroborative evidence of the great disaster narrated in detail in the manuscripts I had found in Inisturk Island. The existence of Atlantis was now thoroughly substantiated. On all sides of me I stumbled across further evidences of these early settlers. Here, standing in bold outline on a slight eminence, was a stone edifice adorned with symbolical carvings of eggs, harps, mastodons, triangles, and numerous other objects, all of which were capable of interpretation and indicated that the building was a temple to some god. I was much struck by the extraordinary similarity in many of the things I saw, notably in the Sphinx, idols, and symbols, to many I had seen in Egypt, and to some extent in Ireland, and I at once set to work to draw up a careful analogy between the languages of those countries. The word Banchichesi (Footnote 2) for Chiche, compare the ancient Maya or Yucatan word Chichen Itza, that is, name of town in Yucatan where excavations are now taking place, 1912. End of footnote. I found to contain the Celtic ban, a barrow, and Coptic isi, plenty, whilst I recognized in the words Colmenes (Footnote 3) for Menes, compare Mayan Menes, wise men. End of footnote. The Celtic Kul, a man's name, that is, Finn, son of Kul. In Taternanage, the Coptic Toth, that is, name of ancient Egyptian deity, and Urs Tirnanage, the name of the wife of Oisin, the last of the Feni. In Chak Moray (Footnote 4), compare Mayan Chak Mol, a leopard. End of footnote. The Coptic deity Re. In Ozilmave (Footnote 5), compare Ozil, Mayan for well beloved. End of footnote. The Celtic Maeve, a girl's name. In Taramu (Footnote 6), Mu, Mayan for Macaw. End of footnote. The Celtic Tara, a girl's name. And in Niketoth (Footnote 7), Nike, woman's name in Mayan. End of footnote. Toth, the Urs technical form of feminine gender. And comparing the alphabets, I traced a very striking likeness between Atlantean A and Gaelic or Urs A, Atlantean B and the Coptic B, Atlantean D and the Urs D, Atlantean G and Urs G, Atlantean T and Coptic T, and many of the other letters. To the Atlantean COEZ I could, however, find no likenesses. From all these similarities, that is, in architecture, symbols, letters, and words, I could come to no other conclusion than that there was some strong connecting link between Atlantis and ancient Ireland and Egypt. Assuredly, this great link could not have been merely due to stray survivors of the great catastrophe, Was it not much more probable that the earliest inhabitants of Ireland and Egypt had originally migrated from Atlantis, carrying its language and ways and customs with them? Moreover, since the Atlanteans were so deeply versed in magic and everything appertaining to the occult, this migration would account for the mysticism that has always been so closely associated with Egypt and Ireland, and for the psychic faculty so strongly observable in the inhabitants of these two countries. I was highly satisfied. I had proved much, and my discoveries had upset many of the theories advanced by the modern sages. I could now positively assert that the wisdom of the world came not from the East but from the West. It was to the Golden West, to Banchicheisi, capital of Atlantis, that humanity owed its knowledge of the sciences and arts, and of all things good and evil. Eden, if Eden existed at all, was not in Asia, it was in Atlantis. And the deluge, that is recorded in the Hebrew Bible, and is traditionally in the histories of nearly every tribe and nation, was none other than the mighty inrush of the ocean over Atlantis, due to some abnormal submarine earthquake. Of what eventually became of the Atlanteans whose relics I had so opportunely alighted upon, I could only surmise. The last record I found was on a tablet set up by Niketoth. On this she spoke of the death of Hulir and Ozilmev, of the intermarriage of the crew of the Chakmore with native women, of the consequent growth of the colony, and of her determination to leave it, and accompanied by a chosen few, to push away further inland. [Footnote 9: The anxiety of my comrades to leave the continent perforce put an end to my explorations, and in the beginning of the year 1692, exactly 10 months after our landing, the Peterkin was refloated. This time nothing happened to impede our progress, and in April of the same year we sighted Boston. Here I remained for some months, making many new friends and studying magic and sorcery. But the love of travel had laid so strong a hold on me that I again took to a roving life. I set sail for Spain in November 1692, landed at Corunna, and made my way to Madrid, where I arrived on January 1, 1693. For the rest, Hamar had to turn to Messrs. Fox and Poole's addendum, that is, the footnote that Matt Kelson had read aloud. Hamar was now inclined to regard the book in a very different light. What he had read seemed to him to be set down in too simple, straightforward, and at the same time detailed a manner, to be other than true. Up to the present he had not believed in ghosts and witches, for the very simple reason that, like all sceptics, he had never inquired into the testimony respecting them. He had pooh-poohed the subject because every one he knew pooh-poohed it, and also because it had never seemed worth his while to do otherwise. But provided he thought it would pay him, he was ready to believe in anything: in Christianity, Mohammedanism, Buddhism, Theosophy, or any other creed, and granted the book he had in his hands was really written by Maitland, and Maitland was bona fide, which Hamar saw no reason to doubt, and granted also that Maitland was sane and logical, which from his writing he certainly appeared to be, then there was a certain amount in the volume that in Hamar's opinion was a find. Needless to say, he referred to the magic of the Atlanteans, the art through which, the practice of which, they had got in touch with the powers that could endow them with riches. The actual history of Atlantis, once he was satisfied there had been such a place, did not interest him. He skimmed through it quickly, and I append a brief summary, only for the benefit of more intelligent and disinterested readers. The Atlanteans were the oldest intelligent race in the world. They existed contemporaneously with Paleolithic man, with whom their mariners and explorers frequently came in contact, and about whom their novelists wrote the most delightful stories, just as Fenimore Cooper and Mayne Reid, in these days, have written the most delightful stories about the Red Indians. In religion they were polytheists. They believed that, in the work of creation, many powers participated, that some of these powers were benevolent, some malevolent, whilst others, neither benevolent nor malevolent, were merely neutral. To the benevolent creative powers they attributed all that is beautiful in the world, that is, certain of the trees, plants, flowers, animals, insects, and pleasing colors and scents. All that is fair and agreeable in the human being, such as affection, love, kindness, the arts and sciences, in a word, all that in any degree affected the welfare of mankind. And to the malevolent creative powers they attributed all that was noxious in creation, all that was harmful to man and detrimental to his moral and physical progress, that is, diseases and all savage and filthy passions, all races of low intelligence, such as the Paleolithic and Neolithic man, and all those born with black or red skins, those colors being particularly significant of the malignant occult elements. All destructive animals, that is, reptiles such as the Teleosaurus, Steniosaurus, etc., birds such as the pterodactyl, vulture, eagle, etc., mammals such as the cave lion, cave tiger, etc., fish such as the shark, the octopus, etc., and all ugly and venomous insects. These earliest records show that at one time the physical and superphysical world were in close touch. All kinds of spirits, trolls, pixies, nymphs, satyrs, imps, vagrarians, Barovians, etc., mixing freely with living human beings, but that as the population increased and civilization evolved, superphysical manifestations became more and more rare, until finally they became restricted to certain conditions dependent on time and locality. Footnote 10. Types of elementals still to be met with in certain localities. Vide Byways of Ghostland, published by Ryder and Son. End of footnote. Up to this period there had been no state religion, no temples in Atlantis. If anyone wished for a particular favor from the occult powers, for example from the Rabses, the occult powers of music, the Brakvos, the occult powers of medicine, or the Deranos, the occult powers of love, they retired to some secluded spot and held direct intercourse with these powers. The idea of praying to an invisible being, who might or might not hear them, never entered their minds. They were far too matter of fact for that, and it was not until superphysical manifestations had become confined to a very select few that the plan of erecting public buildings in spots frequented by the spirits, so that all who wished could assemble there and communicate with them, was proposed and put into operation. In these buildings, however, the spirits did not choose always to appear to order. Sometimes they quitted the spot where the edifice had been erected. Sometimes they would only appear there periodically, and sometimes, out of perversity, they would appear when least expected. But whether occult manifestations really took place in these buildings or not, those assembled to see them were persuaded by those in charge of the building, who saw thereby an opportunity of making money, that the spirits were actually there, and in due time these buildings became known as temples, and their showmen as priests. Every temple was dedicated to an individual spirit, one to the spirit Baraboo, another to the spirit Karaboro, and so on, whilst in the absence of genuine spirit manifestations, prayers, incantations, and rituals invented by the priests always attracted a large concourse of people to these temples, and finally proved a greater source of attraction than the spirits themselves. It was to gain favors from the occult powers that donations from the public were at first invited, then demanded, and the priests in this manner accumulated vast fortunes. Later on, too, there sprang up in connection with these temples colleges for the training of young men, invariably selected from the wealthy classes to the priesthood. And from the parents of these youthful aspirants large fees, which in course of time became exorbitant, were extracted, thereby furnishing another source of revenue to the priests. The most famous colleges for the training of priests in Atlantis were those of Baraboo Rek, Footnote 11. Compare Egyptian Ray. End of footnote. At Kasienwo, Caribou Rek at Dianjek, and Baligarap Rek at Tijimin. It was in the reign of Baranile, Footnote 12, Maitland raises the question as to whether Barrowneil was the ancestor of Niall of the Nine Hostages. Of this there is every possibility, since many Atlanteans undoubtedly escaped to Ireland, carrying with them the knowledge of black magic, to which might be traced the banshee and other family ghosts. 51st sovereign of the dynasty of Shotak, that the evocation of spirits, from which modern spiritualism takes its origin, commenced. Barrowneil was most eager to see a superphysical manifestation. Being of a somewhat poetical turn of mind, he was particularly enamoured of fairies, and in the hope of seeing one constantly frequented their favourite haunts, that is, woods, caves, and lonely isolated habitations, but all to no purpose. They never would manifest themselves to him. At last he lost patience. Against the advice of his oldest and most trusty counsellors, and accompanied by one or two of his favourite courtiers, he went to an excessively lonely spot in the heart of a desert, and besought spirits of any sort, he did not care what, to manifest themselves. To his surprise, for he had grown extremely sceptical, an occult form, half man and half beast, #13, probably a vice elemental, materialized. It informed them it was Daramara, that is, in Atlantis, the Unknown; that it had no beginning and no end, and that it would remain an impenetrable mystery to them during their existence in the physical sphere, but would be fully revealed to them when they passed over into Malinok, one of the superphysical planes. On this, and on several subsequent occasions when it manifested itself to them, it gave them instructions with regard to evocation, and described to them the tests they must undergo before they could acquire the great powers the Unknown was able to bestow on them, namely: 1. Second sight. 2. Divining other people's thoughts and detecting the presence of waters and metals. 3. Thought transference, that is, being able to transmit messages, irrespective of distance, from one brain to another without any physical medium. 4. Hypnotism. 5. The power to hold converse with animals. 6. Invisibility, that is, dematerializing at will. 7. Walking on and breathing under water. 8. Inflicting all manner of diseases and torments. 9. Curing all kinds of diseases. 10. Converting people into beasts and minerals. 11. Foretelling the future by palmistry, pyromancy, hydromancy, astrology, etc. 12. Conjuring up all manner of spirits antagonistic to men's moral progress, that is, vice elementals, Vagrarians, Barovians, etc. Taking every care to observe the greatest secrecy, Barrowneil caused a full account of these interviews with Daramara, together with all instructions the latter had given him, to be transcribed in a book which he called Branapotek, #14. All subsequent works dealing with black magic were founded on it, or the Book of Mysteries, and which he kept sealed and guarded in a room in his palace. During his lifetime no one held communication with Daramara saving himself and his friends, but after his death the secret of black magic leaked out. Countless people sought to acquire it, and ultimately the practice of it became universal. But the Atlanteans little knew the danger they were incurring. The spirits they conjured up, though at first subservient, that is to say, mere instruments, at length obtained complete dominion over them. The whole race became steeped in crime and vice of every kind, and so horrible were the enormities perpetrated that, fearful lest man should be entirely obliterated, the benevolent occult powers, after a desperate struggle with the malevolent occult powers, succeeded by means of a vast earthquake in submerging the continent and hurling it to the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean, where what remains of it now lies. This catastrophe took place in the reign of Aboonerin, 20th sovereign of the dynasty of Molonekin, 3,000 years after the reign of Barrowneil. So ran the history of Atlantis, or at least all of it that need be quoted for the elucidation of this story. That black magic, the black art of the Atlanteans, was by no means dead. Hamar felt convinced. And if Maitland could resuscitate it, why could not he? At any rate, he might try. He could lose nothing by giving it a trial, at least nothing to speak of. The outlay of chemicals would be a mere song, whereas, on the other hand, what might he not gain? He eagerly perused the tests. The test he must impose upon himself before he could get in touch with the Unknown and acquire the magic powers, which, according to Thomas Maitland, were copied from the original Brahmapatec, and including a preface, ran as follows: Preface. It is essential that the person desirous of being initiated into the Black Art, the art of communicating with the Unknown, Daramara, in order to acquire certain great powers, should dismiss from his mind all ideas of moral progress, and wholly concentrate on the bettering of his material self, on acquiring riches and fame in the physical sphere. His aspirations must be entirely earthly, and all his affections subordinate to his main desire for wealth and carnal pleasures. Having acquired this preliminary psychological stage, for 1 clear week he must give himself up entirely to the breaking of all the conventionalities of morality with which society is hedged in. He must practice every kind of deception, lie, cheat and steal, and go out of his way to seek an opportunity to avenge any personal injury, and if his mind is earnestly and wholly concentrated on acquiring knowledge of the Black Art, no bodily mishap will befall him. During this time of probation he must will himself to dream, at night, of all the deeds he had it in his mind to do during the day, when he will know by his visions to what extent he is progressing. At the end of the week he must apply the tests to see if he is in a ripe state to proceed. The tests. Number 1. At midnight, when the moon is full, place a mirror set in a wooden frame in a tub of water, so that it will float on the surface with its face uppermost. Put in the water 15 grains of bicarbonate of potash, and sprinkle it with 3 drops of blood, not necessarily human. If the reflection of the moon in the mirror then appear crimson, the test is satisfactorily accomplished. Number 2. At midnight, when the moon is full, take a black cat, place it where the moonbeams are thickest, sprinkle it with 3 drops of blood, not necessarily human, and rub its coat with the palm of the hand. Sparks will then be given out, and if those sparks appear crimson, the test is satisfactorily done. Number 3. Take a human skull, preferably that of some person who has met with an unnatural end. Pour on it a single drop of fresh human blood, place it on a couch, and go to sleep with the back part of the head resting on it. If you are awakened at the 2nd hour after midnight by hearing a great commotion close at hand, and the room is then discovered to be full of crimson light, the test is satisfactorily fulfilled. Number 4. Take half a score of the berries of Enchanter's Nightshade. Footnote 15. Closely allied to deadly nightshade, and known in botany as Cercaea. It is found in damp, shady places, and was used to a very large extent in medieval sorcery. End of footnote. 2 ounces of hemlock leaves in powder, and 1 ounce of red sorrel leaves. Heat them in an oven for 2 hours. Pound them together in a mortar, and at midnight boil them in water. As soon as the contents begin to bubble, remove them from the fire, and stand them in a dark place. And if the experiment is to prove satisfactory, 3 bubbles of luminous green light will rise simultaneously from the water and burst. Number 5. In the above preparation, after the test described, soak a hazel twig, fashioned in the shape of a fork. On meeting a child, hold the fork with the V downwards in front of its face, and if the child exhibits violence and signs of terror and falls down, the experiment is successful. Number 6. Take a couple of handfuls of fine soil from over the spot where some 4-footed animal has recently been buried. Put it in a tin vessel. Mix it with 3 ounces of asafoetida and 1 drachm of quassia chips, to which add a death's head moth (Acherontia atropos). Heat the vessel over a wood fire for 3 hours, then remove it and place it on the hearth. Rake out the fire and make the room absolutely dark. Keep watch beside the vessel, and if at the 2nd hour after midnight any strange phenomena occur, the test will be known to have been satisfactorily executed. Addendum: if any of these tests fail, the candidate must wait for 6 months before giving them a further trial, and he must occupy the interim by training his thoughts in the manner already prescribed. But if, on the other hand, the tests have been successfully performed, he can proceed with the rites appertaining to the Black Art. Hamar had read so far when, with a gesture of impatience, he closed the book. "What a fool I am!" he exclaimed, "to waste my time with such stuff. But Maitland writes in such a devilish convincing way. Jerusalem! Any straw is good enough for the drowning man, and if witchcraft and sorcery, with motors dashing by every second and the whole air alive with wireless and telephones, is a bit beyond my comprehension, what then? All I care about is money, and I'll leave no stone unturned to get it. If it were possible for man to get in touch with Daramara, the Unknown, Devil, or whatever else it chooses to call itself, I'll call it an angel if it only gives me money. 20,000 years ago, why shouldn't it be possible to get in touch with it now? Anyhow, as I said before, I'll have a try. As far as the preliminary stage is concerned, I fancy I'm pretty well fixed. My mind is occupied right now with things of this world. I don't give a cent for anything belonging to another, and if only I had half a dozen souls, I'd sell them right away now, for less than $20,000, a damned sight less. As for these tests, foolish isn't the word for them, but it won't cost much just to try them. Now, according to Thomas Maitland, the ceremony of calling up the Unknown stands a far greater chance of success if there are 3 human beings present. But, of course, if there is any truth in this business, I'd rather keep the secret of it to myself. However, if I try alone, the Unknown may not come to me, and then I shall have had all the trouble of going through the tests for nothing. Ah, now I see. If the other 2 get more of the profits than I think necessary, I can make use of my newly acquired occult power to dissolve partnership. Ha! Ha! I could trick the Unknown if it comes to that. Trust a Jew to outwit the devil. I'll just look up Kelson and Curtis. End of Chapter 2, read by Don W. Jenkins, Rancho San Diego, California. Chapter 3 of the Sorcery Club by Elliott O'Donnell. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Don W. Jenkins. Chapter 3 Learning to Sin. Messrs. Kelson and Curtis did not live in Pacific Avenue, where the Popes held sway, nor yet in California Street, where the Crockers are wont to entertain their millionaire friends. Where they lived there were no massive granite steps flanked with equally massive pillars, such as herald the approach to the Nob Hill palaces; no rare glass bow windows looking out on to flower bedecked lawns; no vast betiled hall with rotundas in the centre; no highly polished oak staircases; no frescoed ceilings; no tufted cerulean blue silk draperies; and no sweet perfumery; only the smell, if one may so suddenly sink to a 3rd-class expression, only the smell of rank tobacco and equally rank lager beer. No, Messrs. Kelson and Curtis resided within a stone's throw of the 5-cent baths in Rutter Street, and that was the nearest they ever got to bathing. Their suite of apartments consisted of one room, about 10 by 8 feet, which served as a dining room, drawing room, study, boudoir, kitchen, bedroom, and, from sheer force of habit, I was about to add, bathroom. But as I have already hinted, cold water on half empty stomachs and chilly livers is uninviting. Besides, soap costs something. Their furniture was antique but not massive, nor could any of it be fairly reckoned superfluous. All told, it consisted of a bedstead, 3 6-foot planks on 4 cigar cubes, the bedclothes, a pair of discarded overalls, a torn and much emaciated blanket, a woolly neck wrap, a yellow vest, and the garments they stood in, a small, round, and rather rickety deal table, and 1 chair. Of the very limited number of culinary utensils, the frying pan was by far the most important. Its handle served as a poker, and its pan, as well as for frying, roasting, and boiling, did duty for a teapot and a slop basin. They had no crockery. They had only one thing in abundance, namely, air. For the lower frame of the window, having long lacked glass in it, a couple of pages of the Examiner fixed in it, flapped dismally every time the wind came blowing down 216th Street. They had not lived there always. In the palmy days of work, before the firm smashed, they had aspired to what might properly be called diggings, and moreover had digged in respectable surroundings. It was the usual thing, the thing that is happening always, every hour of the day, in all the great cities of the world: starvation through lack of employment. Civilization still shuts its eyes to everyday poverty. Who knows? Who cares? Who is responsible? No one. Is there a remedy? Ah, that is a question that requires time. Time, always time. Time for the politician, and time for the starving ones. Half the world thinks, whilst half the world dies. And the cause of it all is time. Too much, a damned sight too much time. But Kelson and Curtis could not grumble. They had their room, bare, dirty, and well ventilated, for next to nothing. 50 cents a week, and they could furnish it as they pleased. Fancy that! What a privilege! They were glad of it all the same, glad of it in preference to the streets, and probably, when asleep, they thought of it as home. But on leaving Hamar's that evening, they had fully resolved to convert their little room into a cemetery. What else could they do? What can anyone do who has no money and no prospect of getting any, and who has reached the pitch of acute hunger? He has passed the stage of wanting work, because, if work were offered to him, he would not be in a fit state to do it. He would be too weak. Too weak to work. What a phenomenon! Yes, to all those who have never missed a day's meals. To others, no. They can understand, and understand only too well, the really poor who have long ceased to eat, cannot work. They are beyond it. When Curtis and Kelson staggered down the stairs of the house where Hamar lodged, they realized that unless something turned up pretty soon, it would be too late. They would be past the stage of caring for anything, too feeble to do anything but lie on the ground and pray that death would come quickly. "Home?" Kelson inquired, as they emerged onto the pavement. "Hell," Curtis answered, and Kelson, taking it for granted that the terms were synonymous, at once headed for their garret. "Don't walk so confoundedly fast," Curtis gasped. "This pain in my side is like 100 stitches rolled in one. It fairly doubles me up. Ease down a bit, for heaven's sake." Kelson obeyed, and presently came to a dead halt before a dingy looking restaurant. Both men leaned against the window and gazed wolfishly at the food. A warm, fetid rush of air from under the grating at their feet tickled their nostrils and mocked their hunger with a mockery past endurance. Arranged on the window sill was a miscellaneous collection of very smeary plates and dishes containing an even more miscellaneous collection of food. A half consumed ham, with more than a mere suspicion of dirt on its yellowish white fat. Some concoction in a bowl that might have been brawn made from some peculiarly liverish pig, or from one of the many homeless mongrels that roam the streets at night. A pile of noxious looking mussels, side by side with a glistening mass of particularly yellow whelks. A round of what purported to be beef, very fat and very underdone. Some black, shiny sausages, and a score or so of luridly red polonies. A similar assortment was to be seen on the counter, behind which lolled an anæmic girl in a dirty cotton blouse and a much soiled sky blue skirt. A month ago such an exhibition would have been an offence in the fastidious eyes of Messrs. Kelson and Curtis, but now it was otherwise. Their stomachs would have refused nothing short of garbage. "Matt!" Curtis's hands had left off clutching at his belt and were now hanging by his side, the fingers twitching to and fro in a manner that fascinated Kelson. "Matt, is there any logic in our starving?"
"None, excepting that we haven't a cent between us," Kelson rejoined.
"I know that," Curtis went on slowly, "but I mean, why should we starve when all this grub is within 2 inches of us? It's unreasonable. It's intolerable."
"Doesn't the smell of it satisfy you?" Kelson replied, attempting to force a smile and failing dismally.
"Damn the smell!" Curtis cried. "It's the ham I want. I'd give my soul for a good munch at it. And just look at that tea, too. Don't you see it steaming over there? What wouldn't I give for just 1 cup? 10 minutes more and it may be too late. The pain will come on again, and it will be very doubtful if I shall ever get home. I'm close on the stage where one begins to digest one's own stomach. Curse it, I won't starve any longer. Matt, she's in there all by herself."
"So I've been thinking," Kelson murmured, glancing uneasily up and down the street. "Still, she's a girl, Ed."
"That's just it," Curtis whispered. "It is because she is a girl. If she were a man, in our present condition, we shouldn't stand a chance. Come on, it's this or dying in the gutters. It's our one and only chance. Let's go in, have a feed, take what we can and make a bolt for it. If she tries to stop us, we can settle her right enough."
"Without being too rough. There's no need to be too rough with her, Ed."
"I shouldn't stick it much," Curtis answered. "Occasions like these don't admit of chivalry. Come along, it's the ham I'm after." Curtis shuffled forward as he spoke, and the next moment Kelson and he were standing in front of the counter. The girl eyed Curtis very dubiously, and it is more than likely would have refused to serve him had he been alone. But her expression changed on looking at Kelson. Kelson was one of those individuals who seldom fail to meet with the approval of women. There was a something in him they liked. Probably neither he nor they could have defined that something. But there it was, and it came in extremely handy now.
"What do you want?" she inquired shortly.
"Ham. Give me some of that ham over there, miss, and a cup of tea. Bread, too," Curtis cried eagerly. "Do you know what it is to have a twist on, miss? I have one on now, so please give us a full 25 cents worth." Kelson said nothing, but his eyes glistened, and the girl wondered as she passed him the polonies. Both men ate as they had never eaten before, and as they would not have eaten now had they paid any attention to the advice of hunger experts. However, they survived, and when they could eat no more they leaned back in their chairs to enjoy the sensation of returning, albeit slowly returning, strength. Curtis was the first to make a move. "Matt," he murmured, "we've about sat our sit. We'd better be off. You go and say a few nice words to the girl and make pretence of paying. I'll secure the ham there's still a good bit left and anything else I can grab. The moment I do this, throw these chairs on the ground so that the girl will fall over them when she makes a dash for me, which she is certain to do. We will then head straight away for 216th Street. Don't look so scared or she will think there is something up. She has never taken her eyes off you since we sat down."
"She's rather a nice girl," Kelson said. "I wish I didn't look quite such a blackguard, and I wish I hadn't to be quite such a blackguard. Who'll pay for all this? Will she?"
"We shan't, anyway," Curtis sneered. "Come, this is no time to be sentimental. It was a question of life and death with us, and we've only done what anyone else would do in our circumstances. The girl won't lose much. Are you ready?" Curtis rose, and Kelson, who was accustomed to obey him, reluctantly followed suit. A look almost suggestive of fear came into the girl's eyes as they encountered those of Curtis, and she shot a swift glance at an inner door. Then Kelson spoke, and as she turned her head towards him, her lips parted in a sort of smile. "Nice night, miss, isn't it?" Kelson said, halting halfway between the counter and the chairs.
"Aren't you a bit lonely here all by yourself?" "Sometimes," the girl laughed, "but my mother's in the room there," and she nodded in the direction of the closed door, "and one can't be too dull when she's about. She's that there active, as a rule. There's no keeping her quiet. Only just at present," here she glanced apprehensively at Curtis, "she's recovering from ague. Gets it every year about this time. Your friend seems to have kind of taken a fancy to our ham."
Kelson looked at Curtis and his heart thumped. Curtis's right hand was getting ready to spring at the ham, whilst his left was creeping stealthily along the counter in the direction of a loaf of bread. Kelson slowly realized that an acute crisis in both their lives was at hand, and that it depended on him how it would end. He had never thought it possible to feel as mean as he felt now. Besides, his natural sympathy with women tempted him to stand by the girl and prevent Curtis from robbing her. He was still deliberating when he saw two long, dark objects with lightning rapidity swoop down on the plates and dishes. There was a loud clatter, and the next moment the whole place seemed alive with movement. A voice, which in his confusion he did not recognize at once, shouted, and seemingly from far away, "Quick, you fool, quick! Fling down the chairs and grab those sausages!" Whilst from close beside him, almost, he fancied in his ears came a wild shriek of
"Mother! Mother! We are being robbed!"
Had the girl appealed to him to help her, it is more likely that Kelson, who was even yet undecided what course to adopt, would have offered her his aid. But the instant she acted on the defensive, his mind was made up. A mad spirit of self preservation swept over him, and, dashing the chairs on the ground at her feet, he seized the sausages and flew after Curtis. 10 minutes later, Curtis and Kelson, their arms full of spoil, clambered up the staircase of their lodgings and reeled into their room. "Look!" Curtis gasped, sinking into the chair. "Look and see if we are followed."
"There's no one about," Kelson whispered, peering cautiously out of the window. "Not a soul. I don't believe after that first rush across Rudder Street any one noticed us. To leave off running was far the best thing to do. You are a perfect genius, Ed. I wonder if this sort of thieving is dormant in most of us. I say, old fellow, I wish I hadn't looked at that book of Hamar's. Do you know, directly I took it up an extraordinary sensation of cunning came over me, and I declare, when I put it down I felt it would take very little to make me a criminal."
"We're both criminals now, in the eyes of the law, anyway," Curtis said. "And now we've got so far, there's no alternative but to go on. It's easier for 100 camels to pass through the eye of a needle than for a clerk to get work. That's a fact. The markets are hopelessly overstocked. No one wants us. No one helps us. No one even thinks about us. The labouring man gets pity and cents galore. We get nothing. Nothing but rotten pay whilst we work, and when we're out of work, doss houses or curbstones. Damn clerks, I say. Damn everything. There's no justice in creation. There's no justice in anything, and the only people who prate of it are those who have never known what it is to want. Say, when shall we take the next lot?"
"When we're obliged, not before," Kelson said. "Or rather, you do as you like, and I'll do the same."
"Well, I'm not going to commit suicide, anyhow," Curtis sneered. "We haven't the money to buy poison, and I've no mind to drown myself or cut my throat. They're too painful. If we don't go on doing what we've done to night, what are we going to do?"
"Trust to luck," Kelson sighed.
"All right, you trust to luck, but I won't trust any more in Providence, and that's a fact," Curtis retorted. "We've been done enough. Now I'm for doing other people. Good night." He tumbled into the makeshift bed as he spoke, and in a few minutes, worn out after the unwonted exertions of the evening, both men were fast asleep. They were at breakfast next morning real déjeuner à la carte, sausages, bread, water, and they were doing ample justice to it, when someone rapped at the door. For a few seconds there was silence. Their hearts stood still. Had they been followed after all? Was it the police? Someone spoke, and they breathed again. It was Hamar. "This looks like starving, I must say," Hamar exclaimed, as he sniffed his way into the room and sat on the bed. "Why, from what you fellows told me last night, I thought you were cleared out. And here you are, stuffing like roosters. You look a bit surprised to see me. But you'll look more surprised, I reckon, when I tell you what brings me here. You remember that book?" Kelson and Curtis nodded. "Well," Hamar went on, "I read it after you left last night, and I've come to the conclusion that there's something in it that may be of use to us." "Us?" Curtis ejaculated. "Yes, us," Hamar mimicked. "It contains full particulars of how we can get in touch with certain occult powers that can give us money or anything else we want." "Rot, of course," Curtis said. "You say that now, but listen to me," Hamar replied. "Since I've read that book I believe there's a lot more in occultism than people imagine. You may recollect the name of the author of the book, Thomas Maitland? Well, to begin with, he impresses me as being truthful, and he not only believed in magic, but he practiced it. If he hadn't gone into details, I shouldn't think anything of it, but he's so darned thorough, and tells you exactly what you've got to do to get in touch with the occult powers and to practice sorcery. He learned it all from that old manuscript he found, written by an Atlantean, and the Atlanteans, he says, were adepts in every form of occultism. I tell you, this chap himself scoffed at it at first, and it was more out of curiosity, he says, than because he was convinced, that he began to experiment. He afterwards came to the conclusion that the Atlanteans were no fools. What they had written about the occult was absolutely correct. There was another world, and it was possible to get in touch with it. Now, if Thomas Maitland was able to practice sorcery, why can't we? There was a gap of close on 20,000 years between his time and that of Atlantis, and there's not so much more than 200 years between his day and ours. But, of course, if you're going to pooh-pooh the whole thing, I won't trouble to tell you any more." "Well, Leon," Kelson ejaculated, "magic and sorcery do seem a trifle out of date, don't they? Could any one look out of the window at what is going on in the streets below, and at the same time believe in fairies and hobgoblins? Still, the book made a bit of an impression on me, so that I'm inclined to agree with you. Anyway, go ahead. Ed is agreeable, aren't you, Ed?" Curtis gave a sulky nod. "I'm not averse to anything that may put us in the way of a livelihood," he said. Hamar, somewhat appeased, briefly informed them of the tests and other preliminaries necessary for the acquirement of the Black Art, and without more ado proposed that they, the three of them, should form a syndicate and call it the Sorcery Company Limited. "To begin with," he said, "we might sell tricks and spells, and later on tackle something more subtle. Why, we could soon knock all the jugglers and doctors on the head and make a huge fortune." "That is to say, if it isn't all humbug," Curtis observed. "Well, do you or don't you think it worth trying?" Hamar cut in. "You call me a Jew, but Jews, you know, have a tolerable cool head and a keen faculty for business. They don't touch anything unless it is pretty certain to bring them in money. Will you try?" "Y-E-S," Curtis said slowly. "I'll try." "And you, Matt?" Hamar queried. "We must have three." "I don't mind trying," Kelson replied. "I expect it will be only a try." "That settles it, then," Hamar cried. "Now we'll get to business. To begin with, we're all wholly occupied with things of this world money chiefly." "Sometimes music," Curtis said sententiously. "And sometimes girls," Kelson joined in. "Music's a pose on Ed's part. I don't believe he really cares a bit for it. He's far too material." "Just what I want him to be," Hamar laughed. "Girls are material enough too, especially when you take them out to supper. Anyhow, money is our first consideration, isn't it?" To this there was general assent. "The preliminary requirement is fixed, then," Hamar said. "Now for the week of wild oats lying, stealing, cheating, anything to counteract the code of Moses. Let's take them in turn. Lying won't trouble us much. Everyone lies. Lying is the stock in trade of doctors, lawyers, sky pilots, storekeepers " "And dentists," Curtis chimed in. "And shop girls," Kelson added. "All women, rich as well as poor," Hamar went on. "Lying is woman's birthright. She lies about her age, her looks, her clothes, everything. With a lie she sends callers away, and when she is in the mood entertains them with lies. Women are born liars, but they are not the only liars.
In these days of keen competition everyone lies. Every editor, publisher, undertaker, piano tuner, dustman they couldn't live if they didn't. Moreover, lying is natural to us all. Every child lies as soon as it can speak, and education merely teaches him to lie the more effectually. Lying comes just as natural as sweating."
"Or kissing," Kelson interrupted.
"Or any of the other so called vices," Hamar continued, "so we can manage that all right. As to cheating, having nothing to cheat with, according to instructions we've got to keep in with each other, so present company is accepted, we must pass over that. Now, how about thieving?" "Never done any yet, so can't say," Curtis exclaimed.
"Nor I either," Kelson put in rather hurriedly.
"Well, I didn't suppose you had," Hamar laughed, "though after all, more than half the world does thieve. All employers steal labour from their employees, all tradesmen steal a profit, the wholesale man from the middleman from the retailer. Every government thieves. Look at England, righteous England. At one time or another she has stolen land in every part of the world. But theft is an ugly word. When statesmen steal it's called diplomacy. When the rich steal it's called kleptomania, or business. And it's only when the poor steal that stealing is termed theft. We who have every excuse, we who are starving, will be content with, that is to say, we will only take just enough to keep us alive. A few lumps of sugar, a handful of raisins, or a loaf of bread. How about that?" "I might manage that," Curtis said. "I might, but I don't want to get caught." "And you, Matt?"
"I don't mind stealing food so much," Kelson said. "In the face of so much wealth, and waste too, it seems a bigger sin to starve than to steal a loaf of bread."
"The lying and stealing are fixed then," Hamar laughed. "What you have to do is to make the most of every opportunity you can find of doing people, present company excepted, bad turns." "I don't see how, in our present condition, we can do anyone much harm," Curtis remarked. "We haven't even the means to buy a tin sword, let alone a bomb or pistol. If we wish them ill, perhaps that will do instead." "Possibly, but don't be such an ass as to wish anyone any good," Hamar said. "Do your best to carry out the injunctions I have given you, and we will meet here this day week to discuss the tests."
End of Chapter 3, read by Don W. Jenkins, Rancho San Diego, California. Chapter 4 of the Sorcery Club by Elliott O'Donnell. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Don W. Jenkins. Chapter 4 The Tests. 7 days later, Hamar again knocked at Curtis's and Kelson's door and walked in. A faint sigh of relief escaped him.
"I see we are all right so far," he said.
"I wondered whether I should find you both flown, or lying stretched in the icy hands of death. Have you experimented?" "We have," Curtis said. "We've done our best. In what way we prefer not to say."
"Perhaps there is no need,"
Hamar replied, eyeing the mantel shelf, which bore ample testimony to a full larder, and glancing at Curtis's feet, which were encased in a pair of new and very shiny boots. A handsome overcoat that was hanging on the door also attracted his attention, but that he had seen before, and concluded that it had been there on the occasion of his last visit.
"But you had better dry up now, Ed," he continued somewhat caustically, "or there'll be no chance of forming the Sorcery Society. It will be dissolved before it's started. There's no need to ask if you've tried to carry out instructions as to thoughts. I see it in your faces. I could never have believed one experimental week in badness would have made such a difference in your looks."
"You told us to try hard," Kelson murmured, "and naturally we did. I reckon you've done the same, by your expression. I should hardly have known you."
"It shows pretty clearly," Curtis said, "what a lot of bad is latent in most people, and that the right circumstances only are needed to bring it out. Starvation, for instance, is calculated to bring out the evil in anyone, no matter whom. But what puzzles me is how we have escaped being caught."
"That's a good sign," Hamar said. "It bears out what is written in the book. If you give your whole mind to doing wrong during this trial week, you'll meet with no mishap. But you must be heart and soul in it. Hunger made us. Hunger has been our friend."
"What do you mean?" Curtis said.
"Why," Hamar replied, "if we hadn't been well nigh starving, we shouldn't have been able to carry out the instructions quite so thoroughly."
"Have you too stolen?" Curtis queried.
"I have certainly appropriated a few necessaries," Hamar said shortly, "but I mean to stop now. We have higher game to fly at. Now, with regard to the tests, I have not been idle, I can assure you. I have secured all the requisites. The mirror and black cat to use a conventionalism that comes in rather handy, the mirror and cat I picked up. The skull I borrowed from a medical I know. The moth from someone's private collection, and the elderberries, hemlock and chemicals I obtained from a drug store man in Battery Street with whom I used to deal. The moon will be full to night, so that we may as well begin. Will you come round to my room at 11:30?
They promised, and Hamar, as he took his departure, again glanced at the handsome fur coat hanging on the door. He was hardly out of hearing when Curtis looked across at Kelson. "Do you think he recognized it?" he whispered. "You may bet he did, and he had only just stolen it himself. However, it's his own fault. He told us to lie and steal, and we've done his bidding."
"We have indeed," Kelson sighed. "At least you have. For my part, I'd rather be content with food."
"Well, I needed clothes just as much as food," Curtis snarled. "If I went about naked, I should only be sent to prison. That's the law. It punishes you for taking clothes, and it punishes you for going without them. There's logic for you." Curtis and Kelson spent the rest of the day indoors, and at night sallied forth to Hamar's. The solitary attic, if one could thus designate a space of about 3 square feet, which comprised Hamar's lodging, had the advantage of being situated in the top story of a skyscraper at least a skyscraper for that part of the city. From its window could be seen, high above the serried tanks of chimney pots on the opposite side of the street, those two newly erected buildings, William Carman's chewing gum factory in Harn Street, and Mark Goddard's 8-storied private residence in Van Ness Avenue. And as if this were not enough architectural grace for the eye to dwell on, glimmering away to the right was the needle like spire of Moss Bates' devil dodging establishment in Branman Street, whilst just behind it, in saucy mocking impudence, peeped out the gilded roof of the Nee brothers' recently erected cinematograph palace. All this and more, much more, was to be seen from Hamar's outlook, all for the sum of $1.50 per week. When Curtis and Kelson entered, the room was aglow with moonlight, and Hamar and the black cat were stealthily regarding one another from the opposite corners of the room. From far away, from somewhere in the very base of the building, came the dull echo of a shout, succeeded by the violent slamming of a door, whilst from outside, from one of the many deserted thoroughfares below, rose the frightened cry of a fugitive woman. Otherwise all was comparatively still. "You're a bit early," was Hamar's greeting, "but better that than late. Everything is ready, so all we've got to do is to wait till 12. Sit down." They did as they were told. Presently the cat, forsaking its sanctuary and ignoring Curtis's solicitations, glided across the floor, and climbing on to Kelson's knee, refused to budge. The trio sat in silence till a few minutes before midnight, when Hamar rose, and selecting a spot where the moonbeams lay thickest, placed thereon the tub of water, in which, with its face uppermost, he proceeded to float a small mirror set in a cheap wooden frame. He then calmly produced a pocket knife. "What's that for?" Kelson inquired nervously. "Blood," Hamar responded. "One of us must spare 3 drops. The conditions demand it. And after all the ham and sausages you two have eaten, I think one of you can spare it best. Which of you shall it be? Come, there's no time to lose." "Matt has more blood than I have," Curtis growled. "But why not the cat?"
"It would spoil our chances with it for the other experiment," Hamar said. "It's a sulky, cross-grained brute, and would give us no end of trouble. Besides, it can bite. Look here, let's draw lots."
Curtis and Kelson were inclined to demur, but the proposed method was so in accordance with custom that there really did not seem any feasible objection to raise to it. Accordingly lots were drawn, and Hamar himself was the victim. Curtis laughed coarsely, and Kelson hid his smiles in the cat's coat. A neighbouring clock now began to strike 12. "Look alive, Leon!" Curtis cried, nudging Kelson's elbow. "Look alive, or it will be too late. The Unknown is mighty particular to a few seconds. Let me operate on you. I've always fancied I was born to use the knife, but I've really missed my vocation. You needn't be afraid. There's no artery in the palm of your hand. You won't bleed to death." Thus goaded, Hamar pricked away nervously at his hand, and after sundry efforts at last succeeded in drawing blood, 3 drops of which he carefully let fall in the tub. "I wish it was light so that we could see it," Curtis whispered in Kelson's ear. "I believe Jews have different coloured blood to other people." Though Kelson was apprehensive, Hamar did not appear to have heard. His whole attention was riveted on the mirror, on the face of which was a reflection of the moon. "I knew nothing would happen," Curtis cried. "You had better wipe your knife, or you'll be arrested for severing someone's jugular. Hullo! What's up with the cat?" Hamar was about to tell them to be quiet when Kelson caught his arm. "Leon, look! What's the brute doing? Is it mad?" Kelson gasped. Hamar turned his head, and there, crouching on the floor in the moonlight, was the cat, its hair bristling on end and its green eyes ablaze with an expression which held all 3 men speechless. When they were at last able to avert their eyes, a fresh surprise awaited them. The reflection of the moon in the mirror was red. Not an ordinary red, not merely a colour, but red with a lurid luminosity that vibrated with life, with a life that all 3 men at once recognized as emanating from nothing physical, from nothing good. It vanished suddenly, quite as suddenly as it had come, and the reflection of the moon was once again only a reflection, a white placid sphere. For some seconds no one spoke. Hamar was the first to break the silence. "Well," he exclaimed, drawing a long breath, "what do you think of that?" "Are you sure you weren't faking?" Curtis said. "I swear I wasn't," Hamar replied. "Besides, could anyone produce a thing like that? The cat didn't think it was a fake. I knew what it was right enough. Besides, why are your teeth chattering?" "Why are yours?" Curtis retorted. "Why are Matt's?" "Shall we try the second?" Hamar asked. "No!" Kelson and Curtis said in chorus. "No, we've had enough for one night. We'll be off." "I think I'll come with you," Hamar said. "After what has happened, I don't quite relish sleeping here alone, or rather with that cat. Hi, Satan, where are you?" Satan was not visible. It had probably hidden under the bed, but as no one cared to look, its whereabouts remained undiscovered. With the coming of the sun the terrors of the night wore off, and the trio separated. Hamar would on no account accept his friend's invitation to breakfast on the sausages and hams they had run such risks in procuring. He made hasty tracks for a snug restaurant in Bolter Street, where he had a sumptuous repast for $1, and then slunk home. Shortly before midnight all 3 met again, and at once commenced preparations for the second test. The question arose as to who should hold Satan. They all had vivid recollections of the cat's behaviour the previous night. Consequently no one was anxious to officiate. Finally they drew lots, and fate settled on Curtis. An exciting chase now began. Satan, demonstrating his resentment of their treatment of him, at every turn knocked over a water bottle, ripped the skin of Kelson's knuckles, and made his teeth meet in the fleshy part of Curtis's thumb. "Hullo, what are you up to?" Curtis savagely demanded, as Hamar thrust a cup at him. "Hold your hand over it," Hamar said sharply. "Don't suck it. We want blood for this test and for the next." "I wish the brute had bitten you," Curtis snarled. "Then perhaps you wouldn't be so precious keen on economics. You did right to name it Satan, and if it doesn't attract devils nothing will. I'm not going to touch it again. See if you can hold the beast by yourself, Matt. It seems to be less afraid of you than either of us." Kelson called out, "Puss!" and the cat at once came to him. As it was now striking 12, Hamar carefully shook 3 drops of Curtis's blood from the cup on to Satan's back, while he instructed Kelson to rub the animal's coat with the palm of the hand. Kelson cautiously obeyed. There was a loud crackling, and a shower of sparks, of the same lurid red colour as the reflection in the mirror on the previous night, flew out into the enveloping darkness. "That will do," Hamar observed quietly. "Test 2 is satisfactorily accomplished. We must be riper for hell than we imagined. There is no need for you fellows to stay any longer. I can manage the 3rd test alone." As soon as his colleagues had gone, and he felt assured they were no longer within hearing, Hamar took a saucer from the mantelshelf, filled it half full of milk, and poured into it some colourless liquid out of a tiny phial labelled "poison." "Here, pussy," he called out softly. "Pretty pussy, come and have your supper, pussy." And Satan, unable to resist the tempting sight of the milk, crept out of his hiding place and quite unsuspiciously dipped his tongue into the saucer and lapped. Hamar, in the meantime, went to a box at the foot of the bed and produced a sack. Then he slipped on his boots and coat, and opening the door of a cupboard near the head of the bed, fetched out a small spade. He was now ready, and so was pussy. "That paves the way for test 6," Hamar observed. "No one can say I am a waster. I make use of everything and every one." And so saying, he tumbled the cat into the sack and hurried out. Some half hour later he had returned to his room, and was busily engaged in making preparations for test 3. Letting a drop of Curtis's blood fall on the skull, he put the latter under his pillow and retired to rest. He had slept for little over an hour when he awoke with a start. The muffled sound of hammering, as of nails in a coffin, was going on all around him, and occasionally it seemed to him that something big and heavy stalked across the floor. But in spite of the fact that the room was illuminated with a red glow, the same lurid red as had appeared in tests 1 and 2, nothing was to be seen. The phenomena lasted 5 or 6 minutes, and then everything was again normal. Hamar was so terrified that he lay with his head under the bedclothes till morning, and vowed nothing on earth would persuade him to sleep in that room again. But sunlight soon restored his courage, and by the evening he was quite eager to go on with the next test. He had some difficulty in persuading anyone to allow him the use of an oven for so pernicious a mixture as nightshade and hemlock, but at last he overruled the objections of some good natured woman, the mother of one of the office boys at his former employer's, and test 4 proved as successful as the previous 3. The preliminary part of test 5 was also successfully accomplished, but in carrying out the second part of it, Hamar all but met with disaster. He was walking along Kearney Street, with the specially prepared hazel twig carefully concealed beneath his coat, when just opposite Sadler's jewelry store he came across a child standing by itself. The nearest person being some 50 yards away, and no policeman within sight, Hamar concluded this was too good an opportunity to be lost. He whipped out the twig and held it, in the manner prescribed, in front of the child. The effect was instantaneous. The child turned white as death, its eyes bulged with terror, and opening its mouth to its full extent, it commenced to shriek and yell. Then it fell on the pavement, and clutching and clawing the air and foaming at the mouth, rolled over and over. People from every quarter flocked to the spot, and judging Hamar from his proximity to the child to be responsible for its condition, shouted for the police. The latter, however, arrived too late. Hamar, whose presence of mind had only left him for the moment, seeing a bicycle leaning against the store door, jumped on it and soon put a respectable distance between himself and the crowd. That night the trio met once more in Hamar's room for test 6. There was a wood fire in the grate, and on it a tin vessel containing the prescribed ingredients. Somewhat unpleasantly conspicuous among these ingredients were the death's head moth and the soil from Satan's grave. As soon as the mixture had been heated 3 hours, the vessel was removed, the fire extinguished, and the room made absolutely dark. Then the 3 sat close together and waited. On the stroke of 2, every article in the room began to rattle, whilst out of the tin vessel flew a blood red moth. After circling 3 times round each of the sitters' heads, the moth flew back again into the vessel, and the silence that ensued was followed by a soft tapping at the window. and the appearance of something that resembled a big tube filled with a thick pale blue fluid made up of a mass of distinct veins. This tube floated into the room, and passing close to the three sitters, who involuntarily shrank away from it, disappeared in the wall behind them. A loud crack, as if the branch of a tree had broken, terminated the phenomena, the room again becoming pitch dark. But the three sitters, although they knew there would be no further manifestation that night, were too terrified to move. They remained huddled together in the same spot till the morning was well advanced. End of Chapter 3. Read by Don W. Jenkins, Rancho San Diego, California. Chapter 5 of The Sorcery Club by Elliott O'Donnell. This recording is in the public domain. Recording by Don W. Jenkins. Chapter 5. The Initiation. San Francisco possesses one great advantage. You can easily get out of it. Leaving the panhandle of the park behind one, and following the turn of the cars, one passes through a pretty valley, green and fair as any garden, and dotted with small houses. An old cemetery lies to one side of it, where unconventional inscriptions and queer epitaphs can be traced on the half-buried stones, covered with a tangle of vines and weeds. Still moving forward, one reaches Olympus, and climbing to its heights, one sees away below, in the far distance, the Coast Range, like a rampart of strength. The blue waters of the bay sparkling and dancing in the sunlight, steamers flashing their path on its bosom, and tiny white specks scudding in the breeze. Below is the city, its houses, small and closed in, like toy villages in Christmas boxes, whilst the slopes around are green with fresh grass, and here and there are thick clusters of eucalyptus and pines. The ocean is partly hidden from view by a peak, which rises directly to the west and is separated from that on which one is standing by a deep and thickly wooded valley. Descending by means of a narrow winding path, one passes through dense clumps of hickory, chestnut, mountain ash, and walnut trees, whose strong lateral branches afford ample protection from the sun, and at the same time furnish playgrounds to innumerable bright-eyed squirrels. Further down one comes upon gentle elms, succeeded by sassafras and locust, these in their turn succeeded by the softer linden, redbud, catalpa, and maple, and at the foot of the declivity, and in the bottom of the valley, wild shrubbery, interspersed with silver willows and white poplars. Still following the path down the vale in a southerly direction, one at length finds oneself in an amphitheatre, shut in on all sides by trees and bushes of a still greater variety. Here and there a gigantic and much begnarled oak, here a triple-stemmed tulip tree of some 80 feet in height, its glossy, vivid green leaves and profuse blossoms presenting a picture of unsurpassed beauty and splendor. There, equally beautiful, though in marked contrast, a tall and slender silver birch. The floor of the amphitheatre is, for the most part, grass, soft, thick, velvety, and miraculously green. The silence is such as makes it wholly inconceivable that so vast a city as San Francisco can be little over 6 miles distant. Though one may strain one's ears to the utmost, nothing is to be heard but the occasional tinkling of a cowbell, the lowing of cattle, and the desultory note of birds. It is the perfect quiet which nature alone can give, and it so impressed Hamar that he at once decided that this was the very spot essential for the ceremony of initiation into the Black Art. Locality selected, the night had next to be chosen, and the conditions demanding that on the night of the initiation there must be a new moon, cusp of the 7th house and conjoined with Saturn in opposition to Jupiter. Footnote: This is a very sinister sign in astrology, denoting the presence of evil influences of all kinds. Author's note. Hamar and his confederates had to wait exactly 3 weeks from the date of the conclusion of the tests before they could proceed. Shortly before midnight, on the spot already described, Hamar, Curtis, and Kelson met, and after searching thoroughly amongst the trees and bushes in the vicinity of the amphitheatre to make sure no one was in hiding, they commenced operations. On a perfectly level piece of ground, a circle of 7 feet radius was clearly defined. The circle was cut into 7 sectors, and an inner circle from the same centre, with a radius of 6 feet, was next drawn. In each part of the sectors, between the circumferences of the first and second circle, were inscribed in chalk the names of the 7 principal vices, according to the Atlantean ideas, and the 7 most malignant diseases. Within the second circle, and using the same centre, was drawn a third circle, of 5 feet in radius, and in each part of the sectors between the circumferences of the second and third circles were written the names of the 7 types of spirits most antagonistic to man's moral progress. Footnote. According to Atlantean ideas, these spirits were vice elementals, morbus or disease elementals, clonogrians or malicious family ghosts, such as banshees, etc., vampires, Barovians, that is, a grotesque kind of phantasm that frequents places where prehistoric man or beast has been interred, Planetians, that is, spirits inimical to dwellers on this earth, that inhabit various of the other planets, and earth-bound spirits of such dead human beings as were mad, imbecile, cruel, vicious, together with the phantasms of vicious and mad beasts, and of beasts of prey. Author's note. Hamar had brought with him a sack, the same he had used to transport Satan's corpse, and from out of it he produced a half-starved tabby, that obviously could harm no one, owing to the fact that its head was tied up in a muslin bag and its 4 legs strapped together. "It's a good thing there is no member of the Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals anywhere near," Kelson exclaimed, eyeing Hamar resentfully. "Wouldn't a mouse or rat have done as well?" "No!" Hamar ejaculated, depositing the brute with a plump on the ground. "The conditions are that the animal sacrificed must be a cat. I got the poorest specimen I could find, for I dislike butchering just as much as you do." "How are you going to do it?" Kelson asked. Hamar pointed to a chopper. "The conditions say steel," he said. "Only with steel, and I should bungle with a knife. You must look the other way. Now help me with the fire." Besides the cat, the sack contained a dozen or so bundles of faggots well steeped in paraffin, several blocks of wood, a tripod, and a big tin saucepan. With the wood, a fire was soon kindled in the centre of the circle, and the tripod placed over it. 2 pints of spring water were then poured into the saucepan, and to this were added 1 ounce of oxalic acid, 1 ounce of verdigris, 1½ ounces of hemlock leaves, 1/2 ounce of henbane, 3/4 of an ounce of saffron, 2 ounces of aloes, 3 drachms of opium, 1 ounce of mandrake root, 5 drachms of solanum, 7 drachms of poppy seed, 1/2 ounce of asafoetida, and 1/2 ounce of parsley. As soon as the saucepan containing these ingredients began to boil, Hamar threw into it 2 adders' heads, 3 toads, and a centipede. "Where on earth did you get all those horrors?" Curtis asked, shrinking away from the bag which had held them. "Here," Hamar said laconically. "It's extraordinary what a lot of nasty things there are amid so much apparent beauty. I say apparent, because Nature is a champion faker. You have only to rake about in those bushes and you'll find snakes galore, whilst under pretty nearly every stone are centipedes. Like both of you, who never by any chance poke your noses outside the city, I fancied snakes and centipedes were confined to the prairies. But I know better now. Besides, where do you think I found the toads? Why, in the cellars under Meidler's." "What, our late governor's?" Kelson cried. Hamar nodded. "Yes," he said, "under the very spot where we used to sit. The water's a foot deep in that cellar, and if there are as many toads in cellars of the other houses in the block, then Sacramento Street has a corner on them. I'm going to be executioner now, so look the other way, Matt." Kelson needed no second bidding, and sticking his fingers in his ears, walked to some little distance. When Hamar called him back, the deed was accomplished, the conditions prescribed in the rites had been observed. The tabby was in the saucepan on the fire, and its blood had been besprinkled on each of the 7 sectors of the circle. "We must now take our seats on the ground," Hamar said. "I'd better be in the centre, you, Matt, on the right, and you, Ed, on the left, allowing 3 clear feet between us." Hamar showed them how to sit, with legs crossed and arms folded. For some minutes no one spoke. The wind rustled through the bushes and an owl hooted. Kelson, feeling the night air cold, drew his overcoat tightly around, and the others followed suit. Then Curtis said: "Do you really think there's anything in it, Leon? Aren't we fools to go wasting our time like this?" To which Hamar replied: "Shut up! You were frightened enough doing the tests." From afar off, away on the shimmering bosom of the bay, came the faint hooting of a steamer. "That's the Oleander," Kelson murmured. "Rot!" Curtis snapped. "How do you know? You can't tell from this distance. It might be the Daisy, or the San Marie, or any other ship." Kelson made no reply. Hamar blew his nose, and once again there was silence. The effect of the moonlight had now become weird. From the trees and bushes crept legions of tall, gaunt shadows, and whilst some of these were explicable, there were others that certainly had no apparent counterparts in any of the natural objects around them. Even Curtis, in spite of his scoffing, showed no inclination to examine them too closely, but kept his face resolutely turned to the more cheery light of the fire. The soft, cool, sweet scented air gradually acted as an anaesthetic, and Kelson and Curtis were almost asleep, when Hamar's voice recalled them sharply to themselves. "It's just 2," he said. "Sit tight and listen while I repeat the incantation, and for goodness' sake keep cool if anything happens. Remember we are here with an object, namely, to get everything we can out of the other world." "Trust you for that," Curtis sneered. "But all the same, nothing's going to happen." "I am not sure of that," Hamar said, and after a brief pause began to repeat these words. [Footnote: They are a literal translation of the Atlantean by Thomas Maitland, and are very nearly identified with forms of spirit invocation used in Egypt, India, Persia, Arabia, and among the Red Indians of North and South America. Author's note. "Morbus from the mountains, where flow malignant fountains, we are ready for you. Come! Vampires from the passes, where grow blood-sucking grasses, we are ready for you. Come! Vice elements pretty, give ear unto our ditty, we are ready for you. Come! Planetians, forms so fearful, we inform you eager, tearful, we are ready for you. Come! Clanogrians, things of sorrow, postpone not till tomorrow, we are ready for you. Come! Barovians, shades seclusive, be not to us exclusive, we are ready for you. Come! Earthbound spirits of the dead approach with grim and noiseless tread, we are ready for you. Come!" He then got up, and going to the fire, sprinkled over the flames 6 drachms of belladonna, 3 drachms of drosera, and 1 ounce of nux vomica, using in each case his left hand. Returning to his former position, he drew with the forefinger of his left hand on the ground the outline of a club foot, a hand with the fingers clenched, and a long pointed thumb standing upright, and a bat. At his request, Kelson and Curtis carefully imitated the devices, each in the space allotted to him. Hamar then cried, "Christi Havunen Balababoo," which Hamar explained was Atlantean for "Devil of the Damned appear." "He won't," Curtis muttered, "because he doesn't exist. There are devils. Meidler brothers are devils, but there is no one devil. It's all—" He suddenly stopped, and an intense hush fell upon them all. A cloud obscured the moon. The fire burned dim, and the gloom of the amphitheatre thickened till the men lost sight of each other. A cold air rose from the ground and fanned their nostrils. Something flew past their heads with an ominous wail, whilst from the direction of the fire came a hollow groan. "The advent of the Unknown," Hamar murmured, "shall be heralded in by the shrieking of an owl, the groaning of the mandrake. There is mandrake in the saucepan, the croaking of a toad. We haven't had that yet." "Yes, there it is," Kelson whispered, and whilst he was speaking there came a dismal croak, croak and the swaying and crying of an ash. Hush! They listened, and all three distinctly heard the swishing of a slender tree trunk as it hissed backwards and forwards. Then a cry so horrid, harsh and piercing that even the sceptical, sneering Curtis gave vent to an expression of fear. Again a hush and increasing darkness and cold. Kelson called out, "Don't do that, Leon." "I'm not doing anything," Hamar said testily. "Pull yourself together." A moment later he said to Curtis, "It's you, Curtis. Shut up. This is no time for monkeying." "You are both either mad or dreaming," Curtis replied. "I haven't stirred from my seat. Hullo! What's that? What's that, Leon? There, over there. Look!" As Curtis spoke, they all three became conscious of living things around them, things that moved about, silently and surreptitiously, and conveyed the impression of mockery. The hills, the valley, the trees were full of it. The whole place teemed with it, teemed with silent, subtle, stealthy mockery. The senses of the three men were now keenly alive, but a dead weight hung upon their limbs and rendered them useless. And as they stared into the gloom, in sickly fear, the firelight flickered, and they saw shadows such as the moon, when low in the heaven, might fashion from the figure of a man. But yet they were shadows neither of man, nor God, nor of any familiar thing. They were dark, vague, formless, and indefinite, and they quivered with a quivering that suggested mockery. Suddenly the shadows disappeared. The flickering of the flames ceased, and in the place of the fire appeared a seething, writhing mass of what looked like white, luminous snakes, and in the midst of this mass sprang up a cylindrical form which grew and grew until it attained a height of 10 or 12 feet, and then it remained stationary and threw out branches. And the three men now saw it was a tree with a sleek, pulpy, semi-transparent, perspiring trunk full of a thick, white, vibrating, luminous fluid, and that it was laden with a fruit, in shape resembling an apple, but of the same hue and material as the trunk. Spread out on the ground around it were its roots, twitching and palpitating with repulsive life, and bare with a bareness that shocked the senses. It was so utterly and inconceivably unlike what Hamar, Curtis and Kelson had imagined the Unknown, and yet withal so monstrous, not merely in its shape but its suggestions, and so vividly real and livid, that they were not merely terrified, they were stricken with a terror that rendered them dumb and helpless. And as they looked at it, from out the trunk shot an enormous thing, white and glistening, and fashioned like a human tongue, and after pointing derisively at them it withdrew, whereupon all the fruit shook as if convulsed with unseemly laughter. And then they saw between the foremost branches of the tree a big eye. The white of it was thick and pasty, the iris spongy in texture, and the pupil bulging with a lurid light. It stared at them with a steady stare, insolent and quizzical. Hamar and his friends stared back at it in fascinated horror, and would have continued staring at it indefinitely had not Hamar's mercenary instincts come to their rescue. He recollected that time was pressing, and that unless he got into communication with the strange thing at once, according to the book, it would vanish, and he might never be able to get in touch with it again. Thus egged on, he made a great effort to regain his courage, and at length succeeded in forcing himself to speak. Though his voice was weak and shaking, he managed to pronounce the prescribed mode of address, viz., "Mra phonen etek mo," which being interpreted is, "Spirit from the Unknown, give ear to me." He then explained their earnest desire to pay homage to the supernatural, and to be initiated into the mysteries of the Black Art. When Hamar had concluded his address, the anticipations of the three as to how it would be answered, or whether it would be answered at all, were such that they were forced to hold their breath almost to the point of suffocation. If the thing could speak, what would its voice be like? The seconds passed, and they were beginning to prepare themselves for disappointment, when suddenly, across the intervening space separating them from the Unknown, the reply came in soft, silky, lisping tones, human and yet not human, novel and yet in some way, a way that defied analysis, familiar. Strange to say, they all three felt that this familiarity belonged to a far back period of their existence, no less than to a more modern one to a period, in fact, to which they could affix no date; and although a perfect unity of expression suggested that the utterance of the thing was the utterance of one being only, a certain variation in its tones, arising and falling from syllable to syllable, led them to infer that the voice was not the voice of one but many.
"You are anxious to acquire knowledge of the secrets associated with the great Atlantean magic," the voice lisped.
"We are," Hamar stammered, "and we are willing to give our souls in exchange for them."
"Souls?"
the voice lisped, whilst trunk and branches swayed lightly and the air was full of silent merriment.
"Souls! You speak in terms you do not understand. To acquire the secrets of black magic, all you have to do is to agree that during a brief period of a few months, you will live together in harmony, that you will make use of the powers you acquire to the detriment of all save yourselves, that you will never allow your minds to revert to anything spiritual, and that you will abstain from marrying."
"And if we succeed in carrying out the conditions?" Hamar asked.
"Then," the voice replied, "you will retain free, untrammeled possession of your knowledge."
"For how long?" Curtis queried.
"For the natural term of your lives, that is to say, for as long as you would have lived had you never been initiated into the secrets of magic."
"And if we fail?"
"You will pass into the permanent possession of the Unknown."
"Does that mean we shall die the moment we fail?" Kelson inquired timidly.
"Die!" the voice lisped. "Again you speak in terms you do not understand. You may be sent for."
"You say in perfect harmony," Hamar put in. "Does that mean without a quarrel, however slight?"
"It means without a quarrel that would lead to separation. The moment you disunite, the compact is broken."
"What advantage will the secrets bring us?" Hamar inquired. "Can we gain unlimited wealth?"
"Yes," the voice replied, "unlimited wealth and influence."
"And health?"
"So long as you fulfill the conditions of the compact, you will enjoy perfect health. Will you, or will you not, pledge yourselves?"
"I'm ready if you fellows are," Hamar whispered. "I am!" Curtis cried. "Anything is better than the life we are living at present."
"And I, too," Kelson said. "I agree with Ed." "Very well, then," the voice once more lisped. "Each of you take a fruit and eat it, and the compact is irrevocably struck. You cannot back out of it without incurring the consequences already named. Don't be afraid. Step up here and help yourselves. One apiece, mind. No more."
And again it seemed to Hamar, Curtis and Kelson as if the tree and everything around it was convulsed with silent laughter.
"Come on," Hamar cried, somewhat imperatively. "Don't waste time. You've decided, and besides, remember this affair may turn out trumps. I'll go first." And walking up to the tree he plucked a fruit and began to eat it. Curtis and Kelson slowly followed suit. "I believe I'm eating a live slug or a toad," Curtis muttered with a retch.
"And I, too," Kelson whispered. "It's filthy. I shall be sick. If I am, will it make any difference to the compact, I wonder?"
What the fruit really tasted like they could never decide. It reminded them of many things and of nothing. It was sweet, yet bitter. It repelled, but at the same time pleased them. It was as perplexing as the voice, as enigmatical. When they had eaten it, they resumed their former positions on the ground, and the voice again addressed them.
"The fruit you have consumed has created in you a fitness to make use of the powers about to be conferred. You have acquired the faculty of sorcery. You will be initiated by stages into the knowledge and practice of it. These stages, 7 in number, will cover the period of your compact, that is, 21 months. And at the end of every 3 months, when a fresh stage is reached, you will receive fresh powers. In the first stage, the stage you are now entering upon, you will receive the power of divination. You will be told how to detect the presence of water and all kinds of metals, and how to read people's thoughts. In the second stage, exactly 3 months from today, you will receive the gift of second sight, the power of separating your immaterial from your material body and projecting it anywhere you will on the physical plane, and, to a large extent, you will be enabled to circumvent gravity. Thus you will be able to perform all manner of jugglery tricks, tricks that will set the whole world gaping. Profit by them. In the third stage you will possess the secrets of invisibility, of walking on the water, of breathing under the water, of taming wild beasts, and of understanding their language. In the fourth stage you will understand how to inflict all manner of diseases, and work all sorts of spells, such, for instance, as bewitching milk, causing people to have fits, bad dreams, etc. You will also know how to create plagues of insects or of any other noxious thing. In the fifth stage you will possess absolute knowledge of the art of medicine, and be able to cure every ailment. In the sixth stage you will acquire the power of producing vampires and werewolves from the human being, and of transforming people from the human to any animal guise. In the seventh and final stage you will be given the complete mastery of every art and science, including astrology, astronomy, necromancy, etc. And for this stage is reserved the greatest power of all, namely, the complete dominion over woman's will and affections. The powers of creating life and of extending life beyond the now natural limit, and of avoiding accidents, will never be conferred on you. Neither shall you learn, nor at least during your physical existence, who or what we are, or the secrets of creation. Each successive stage will cancel the preceding one. That is to say, the powers you have acquired in the first stage will be annulled on your arriving at the second stage, and so on. But if you carry out your compact faithfully, that is to say, if at the end of 21 months you are still united, all the powers you have held hitherto in the different stages, temporarily, will return to you and remain in your possession permanently. Have you anything to say?" "Yes," Hamar answered. "I fully understand all you have explained to us, and I like the idea of it immensely. The fear of our coming to any serious loggerheads and of dissolving partnership doesn't worry me much, but I must say it seems very remote the prospect of gaining such tremendous powers that will give us practically everything we want save youth." "Youth you will never regain," lisped the voice. "And elixirs of life, surely you must know, are no longer sought after by beings of the planet Earth. They are quite out of date. You will, of course, learn the most efficacious means of making yourselves and other people youthful in appearance."
"Yes, but how shall we learn these secrets?" Kelson nerved himself to ask.
"They will be revealed to you in various ways. Sometimes when asleep. You will receive preliminary instructions as to divination before this time to morrow."
"And meanwhile we shall be in want of money," Curtis remarked.
"No," the voice replied. "You will not be in want of money. Have you anything more to ask?"
No one spoke, and the silence that followed was interrupted by a loud rustling of the wind. The darkness then lifted, but nothing was to be seen nothing save the trees and bushes, moon and stars.